It was cold, very cold, perhaps colder than Cassidy had ever felt in all her life. She was hung up against the wall like an animal ready to be slaughtered. The place reeked of death. Cassidy couldn't hold back the sense of isolation she felt. She wanted to call out for help, but was paralysed by fear. Where was she? Why was it so empty? Why was it so cold? Cassidy concluded that this must be hell. She was weak. Wherever she'd been, clearly a while, she could already feel scars from when she'd been pulled apart and put back together again. She felt a faint yet clear voice berate her. Die. 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 It rang, getting louder in her ears, over and over, until she fell into a deep, unconscious state. Before she closed her eyes, she could feel a presence just beyond her eyes' point of view, getting closer and closer and closer, until she was out completely. Far away, the doctor sat on the ground and looked into the black, vacant river. They tossed a stone into the water and looked into their reflection amongst the ripples. They didn't know what they saw. They just didn't know who they were anymore. The mists had cleared and everyone had run to cower in fear and hold their loved ones. Tensions were rising. The doctor could sense a lack of control within the village. No one trusted anyone anymore. Only Agnes remained beside the doctor. The doctor looked once more at their reflection. They could see Agnes's reflection mirrored just above them. They turned round to face them. "You're still here," they stated. "Why are you still here?" "Guilt, perhaps," she replied. The doctor looked deep into her eyes. "It's not guilt. You can see a guilty person's eyes are miles off. In you I see..." They paused and pondered what to say next. "Regret. You lost your friend. I can see you're in pain, and maybe I could have done something about that," they responded, sitting beside the doctor. "You felt it before, didn't you?" she said as she offered the doctor her wrist. The doctor ran their fingers alongside of her wrist, faintly, but it's stronger now. A double pulse. "I'm not of this world, and I fear this is all my fault." "Not the only one," they replied, getting up off the ground. "She's in danger, you see, and it's my fault, not yours." "It's always mine," they replied, with a lump of woe stuck in their throat. "What do I do?" Agnes inquired. The doctor had moved towards their TARDIS. "Wait, I'll be back. And when I am, I'll need you. So be ready," they said, as they went back inside the TARDIS and dematerialised, leaving Agnes alone by the river. Elsewhere, back at Earl Robert's castle, he sat alone, mulling over a goblet of wine in the banquet hall. He wondered if perhaps he was wrong to accuse Cassidy, and if the doctor would ever forgive him. He hoped so. He had already begun to grow quite attached to the doctor, and missed them greatly. No sooner had he thought of this than the TARDIS materialised in front of him, on his breast rug no less. The door opened ajar, as the light from the window seemed to entice Robert. Robert put his hand against the door of the TARDIS. This strange blue box was unlike anything he'd ever seen before in his whole life. As he pushed the door softly, he began to feel as though he were a child again, and any magical adventure were possible. Robert's eyes widened as he entered the TARDIS. It truly was like stepping into a magical land of fairy tale and wonder. It felt so human and so alien at the same time. As he looked up at the ceiling, he saw grand archways which reminded him of great Gothic cathedrals reaching up into the sky. The Doctor was stood at the console as if waiting for Robert to say something. "So, what do you think?" Robert had his mouth wide open, like a tunnel reaching deep into his throat. He was lost for words. He managed to find them. It's, he said, flapping his arms around like a crazed chicken. "It's bigger on the inside." "You don't say," the Doctor replied with a charismatic smile which appealed to Robert as they pulled a lever, hurling the TARDIS into flight like a roller coaster. "Hey, Robbie, I need something from you," they requested as they avoided eye contact with Robert. Robert was slightly irritated by the shortening of his name, but eagerly responded, "Sure, anything, I'll be there." The Doctor looked back at their reflection, still unknown of what to say to what they saw. "Tell me, look straight into my eyes. Do you trust me?" Robert did this, but he couldn't look into their eyes with confidence. He quivered. "Well, I've only just met you," he said, looking down at the controls of the console. "But do you?" Robert paused and debated what to say. "No." The Doctor nodded in acknowledgement as the TARDIS landed with a dramatic thud. "So, this is a magic box, then?" "In a way, I suppose it is," replied the Doctor as they moved towards the door. "So you really are a sorcerer?" "No." Robert gave the Doctor a perplexed look. "So, what are you?" he inquired. "A doctor, I'd like to think," the Doctor said, looking down in dismay as they exited through the doors of the TARDIS. Robert moved slowly towards the door, looking back at the majestic console room before doing so. Robert exited the TARDIS to find he was no longer in his banquet hall, but somewhere entirely different. It was a small, confined room. There were pillars made of green marble holding the ceiling up, as if they were holding the weight of an entire planet of their shoulders. Robert could already sense the Doctor was much more tense. Their face was filled with rage and distrust. There was a small porthole-like window. Robert looked out of it. He could see a sky burning orange like a forest fire, and a citadel, shattered and derelict. "Where are we?" he asked with a fibre of fear in his voice. The Doctor didn't reply. They were already absorbed in the futuristic-looking computer bank. Robert peered over his screen to see what he was looking for Agnes. But why her? What link did she have to all this? It hardly mattered. There were no results for the request. Beside the computer, there was a large oak bookcase filled with ancient-looking books, with pages fraying uncontrollably like a weed infestation. A lot of the titles made very little or no sense to Robert. For example, Omega's Rise to Power, The Life and Times of the Master, and Death to the Daleks. But there was one that stood out to Robert. Time Lord, Demons and Creatures of the Wraith, by Asmail. Robert retrieved the book from the shelf and skimmed through some of the pages out of curiosity. He saw creatures that would haunt children's nightmares. The Nightmare Child, the Dark Entity, the Children of the Dream Butcherer, and the Puppet Lord. Robert was about to turn the page when he noticed something familiar about the ink illustration for the creature. He couldn't read any of the text, but it depicted a horned beast using parts of dead children to form a body, using them to make their puppets. "Hey, Doctor, I think this might be significant," Robert said, calling the Doctor away from the computer. They took the book from Robert and examined it. "Ah, of course. Now it all makes sense," they exclaimed as they slammed the book shut and took Robert's hand, whizzing them back into the TARDIS uncontrollably. They flicked some switches fast as lightning, and the TARDIS left and landed again in an instant. The Doctor was moving so quickly, Robert didn't have time to speak up and ask what was going on. They had landed. The Doctor once again whizzed Robert through the door and back outside again. They had returned to Twarbyhurst. They were in the centre of a village. A fire had started to burn through the centre, surrounding the houses. Robert finally stood his ground and yanked his hand from the doctor's palm. "Stop! Just stop!" he yelled. The doctor turned to Robert in confusion. "Stop? You need to slow down and listen to me," Robert explained, looking into the warm flames. "Why should I? You bring me along with you, if not to ask questions," he snapped back at them. The doctor fell into silence, acknowledging that Robert had made a good point. "Look, you wouldn't understand." Robert sighed, already losing his patience with the doctor, as they avoided the question. "At least tell me, where was that place?" The doctor had already moved on and was no longer looking at Robert. "Does it matter?" "Yes, of course it matters. How can you expect me to trust you if you won't tell me the truth?" Robert asked. The doctor turned round to face Robert again, their eyes already filled with so much painful disdain. "That place, that planet, it's where I used to call home." Robert wanted to ask more, as he was completely bewildered, but the doctor had already begun to move on. He knew further questioning would only lead to more pain on the doctor's part, so he decided it was best to follow after them for now. Meanwhile, Cassidy, now free of her chains, was completely isolated. She had no idea where she was or how she could get out, but she found herself thinking about her small flat in Newcastle. Despite all its problems, she missed it deeply. A voice echoed in the dark chamber, booming like a broken megaphone. "I will speak with you now," the voice commanded. Cassie got off the floor as she wiped away a fearful tear. "What do you want?" "From you, information," the voice replied. "That's nice. What if I refuse?" Cassidy asked confidently. "You will die," the creature replied coldly without hesitation. After the voice said these words, the confidence disappeared from Cassidy's face. "What are you?" she asked, now through false confidence. "A creature of immense power, and an entity beyond your understanding," they replied. "Oh, really? Because I've had a crazy few days. I'll understand anything at this point." She yelled into the void of nothingness. "You may find it wise not to interrogate me. I can, after all, kill you at any moment," the voice explained. "Then why don't you?" "I'm not going to tell you anything," Cassidy said as she sat back down and hid her face in her arms. "Tell me about the doctor." Cassidy looked up again. "The doctor? What do you know about the doctor?" "A great many things. You know, I can smell it on you. You already reek of their spirit. They will break you in the end," the voice bellowed. Cassie dismissed this, shaking her head. "You know nothing, then." The voice let out a malevolent cackle. "Oh, I know nothing. You are the one who lives in ignorance. The doctor walks in shadow and bone. Everywhere they walk, they leave nothing but dust. Civilizations have burned at their hands. In the end, this life will kill you, like so many of their pets before you." "Is this why you're here, then? The doctor, whatever you are?" "Oh no, I'm here to collect my prize." "Your prize?" Cassidy said, shaking her head in confusion. "What does that mean?" "The telepath. Her energy is what I will feast upon. She will power my puppets for centuries to come," the creature exclaimed, almost as if they were, licking their lips. "Oh, so that trick in the river was you?" "Of course it was." "And what about me? Am I not to become one of your puppets?" Cassidy inquired. "You are not pure." "Not pure?" Cassidy said, as her confusion intensified. "What do you mean, not pure?" "Enough! I have told you more than I intended," the creature said, as the voice let out a cackle like twigs snapping, indicating that they were gone. "No, please!" she yelled, getting up on her feet again. "Please, you can't just leave me here." Cassie felt alone again. She hoped the doctor would come for her soon, but after what the creature had said to her, she began to doubt that the doctor would ever even find her. Meanwhile, Agnes had been waiting in her humble cottage at the edge of the forest. Her cottage was small as a shoe-ins to a mouse. However, she was comfortable. She felt even more alone without her children, though. To her house was really like an empty void without them. She picked up a carved wood toy, which her daughter had played with. She tried to remember her playing in the garden, but all she could see was the image of her decapitated head on her plate at the banquet. She violently threw the toy on the floor as she couldn't bear the thought for more than a second. She then threw herself to the ground and broke down in a fit of despair. She was on the floor in a ball with tears streaming down her face like an eternal waterfall of pain. She couldn't hold back the deep emptiness she felt deep inside her heart. It was as if someone had torn a great big gaping hole right through it. It had been her sole duty to protect them, but she had failed. That was when she heard a loud knock at the door, like a thumping tree bellowing in the wind. She opened the wooden door to her house, which let out a freak-like engine firing up. Outside her house stood the doctor, standing rather tensely like a locust, and Earl Robert, who looked as if they'd been shaken up more than a James Bond cocktail. "Hello, may we come in?" the doctor said, before barging in without leaving a second for Agnes to reply. "Thank you very much." Agnes looked somewhat appalled at this lack of manners. Meanwhile, Robert remained standing at the doorway rather awkwardly, like a scrunched-up hedgehog. "You might also come in if you wish," Agnes sighed, welcoming Robert into her house. The doctor noticed that the fireplace was bare, despite the fact that the night was quickly drawing in and the shadow falling over Twarbyhurst. "You know, you really should get a fire going, otherwise you'll freeze to death," they stated. "Would it matter if I did?" Agnes replied, falling to her knees on the ground. "Yes, it absolutely would." "What do you know about it?" Agnes snarked back at the doctor, quickly becoming fed up with their measly attempts to cheer her up. "What I know is that no matter how low you feel, your life is always worth so much more than you'll ever know. Don't give up. Hold on to your hope. It will keep you fighting. It will make you believe in yourself, and it will define you for the rest of your life. Pain is what makes happiness so special." The doctor spouted as if they were reading from a book of poetry. Agnes let out a small but distinctive smile through her tears. The doctor reached for her wrist again. "It's okay. I don't want to hurt you." "Promise?" she asked with a nervous glance. "Promise." Robert was so confused. "Doctor, what are you doing?" he inquired. "I'm checking her pulse," the doctor explained as they felt her rhythmic heartbeat. "A double pulse," they stated sternly, looking into Agnes's eyes. "But that's not possible, is it?" Robert asked, looking to the doctor for answers. The doctor immediately turned to Robert and looked straight at him, and he into them. The doctor offered their hand to Robert. Robert reached in slowly, running their fingers through the rivets and dents in the doctor's hand, a hand edged by scars of their very long lifespan. Then he finally settled on their wrist, and he felt the doctor's passionate, hopeful, yet deep down, maybe they didn't show it, but there was fear there too. Robert felt closer to the doctor now more than ever, his deep affection growing like a flower blossoming in spring. The doctor, completely unaware of this, simply said, "See, perfectly possible," they stated before quickly moving their hand away, leaving Robert breathless. "But you're not like me," Agnes intervened. The doctor looked mildly impressed. "You knew then? I saw it in your eyes the moment I saw you," she said as the doctor began to pace around the room. The pomposity, the arrogance, and then something different, something new. As she drew to the end of her statement, the doctor knelt beside her. You're right. You see, I went home, and I looked you up. You don't exist. Well, I'm not a Time Lord, am I? Agnes replied. When Agnes called them a Time Lord, the Doctor felt a gut punch pass through them, like the thought reawakened a long-since forgotten life. Well, what are you then? I am the last of my species, an Apalapachian. A plague came to our world, known as Chen 7, which wipes out all on the planet and leaving only 2 children and me. Agnes paused for a moment. The 2 children I failed to protect. What's Chen 7? Robert asked the Doctor. It's a disease, a deadly disease, which affects 2 hearted species. You're fine, but it has ravished whole civilizations once, until there were only 2 species left, my species and the Apalapachians. Now I guess this means it only leaves us. It was horrible. Our entire civilization gone in a week. I was lucky to already be off-world when the plague hit, Agnes explained. What's all this got to do with this haunting spectre? Robert continued. It's called the Puppet Master. It's a myth among our 2 peoples that when our species died out, the souls of the dead would amalgamate into one creature, seeking up the living souls of other worlds and using them as puppets to try and escape from hell and return to our world. It's short, it's what you could call a devil, really. Although it was rumoured that he was part of the pantheon of discord and was somehow controlled by the trickster. So, the devil really does walk among us, Robert said, shocked and bewildered. Well, what is the devil but an amalgamation of all our greatest fears? Satan means different things to all kinds of species across the universe. Wherever there is fear, wherever there is something under your bed, waiting in the dark, there it is, waiting, just waiting, for the right moment to seek you out and destroy you. So, you might call it Satan, but chances are it's just fear, the Doctor pondered. So, how do you defeat Satan? Robert questioned. Well, one thing's for sure. We don't kill innocent people, because that does nothing but spread more fear, the Doctor said, looking down at Robert, before turning to look at Agnes. And we don't run away, because then fear rules over our lives. Like anything life throws at us, we have to face it head on and beat it. Now, with me to the TARDIS, the Doctor said as they glided a slightly more reflective Agnes and Robert out the door and off to the TARDIS. Meanwhile, Cassidy remained isolated, wishing that anyone would talk to her. The void in which she found herself was slowly starting to drive her insane. While she had no company, but the company of her thoughts, she spent a lot of time pondering what Rani would have thought of all the things she'd seen. Her thoughts quickly turned back to her brother. She wondered about where he was now. She wished she could tell him all about the Doctor. Despite how scared she felt, she was happy she'd chosen to travel with the Doctor. It was like she could see the whole universe anew. Soon she heard the sound of thunder crackling. A strange figure appeared within the void. It looked like a demon made of a torn-up night black robes and strands of material, dancing around like a demon to a satanic hymn in the wind. Its face was unlike anything Cassidy had ever seen. It seemed to resemble some kind of wild animal skull, which was slowly rotting and decaying, corrupted by its years of malice and evil. Its eyes looked hollow, empty, and lifeless as a corpse. Its fingers were dripping in blood, dark red blood, which was smeared up its ferocious claws like a katana soaked in the remains of its victims. It moved around slowly like some kind of ghost or phantom, as if it was fading in and out of reality. It had tall, fearsome horns which seemed to look down at Cassidy like they had eyes of their own. It didn't have a mouth that it could move. Instead, it used its hands like an elderly person on the brink of death. It seemed to be holding up a puppet with strings on a harness, which was manipulating what Cassidy recognised to be a child. Its skin was both white as snow and as cold as a meat freezer. Cassidy saw something in the child's vacant, empty face, something she recognised. She had flashes back to when Agnes had looked back at her child at the banquet. It was the same eyes. This must have been her child, the child she failed to save. Now it was too late to do anything. He had become nothing more than an instrument of this creature's games of torment. "What is this?" Cassidy inquired. The child spoke on behalf of the creature, in the same wooden manner that it had at the banquet. "Your friends approach." Cassidy smiled. There was hope in this vast emptiness, she thought to herself. "That's great news. You better watch out, because when my friends get here, they're gonna beat the shit out of you." "They have the vessel," the child replied bluntly. "The vessel? What is that?" "The last soul. Once I have her, our journey will be complete," the child explained. This is when it started to mesh inside Cassidy's head. The creature was like a ghost that kills people for revenge, but not because it wants to, but because it has unfinished business. She wondered who this creature was referring to, and who was the last soul. Back on the TARDIS, Agnes had found a chair, and was sat down, catching a brief moment of peace in a whirlwind of a day. Her eyes dry and crusty after her flood of tears earlier. She just wanted to be at peace. She wanted to sleep and never wake up again and face reality. She could dream of her people again, her home, but know that she would never return there again. Meanwhile, Robert stood by the doctor at the console, looking into their eyes. The doctor had noticed this, but was attempting to ignore this by fiddling with the controls at the console. Robert could sense all kinds of emotions and thoughts running through their mind. He felt he had to say something. "She's gonna die, isn't she?" The doctor gulped in dread. "She might. So might you. I could too. This is very dangerous. Anyone could die at any moment. But we don't know when. Your eyes, Doctor, they're filled with certainty. The moment you saw that page, you knew she had to die, didn't you?" Robert asked, attempting to get the doctor to look him in the eyes. The doctor moved away from the console and finally looked at Robert. "Can't you see, though? I've got no choice." "There's always a choice. Goodness knows I know that, and I've made the wrong choice countless times. But perhaps I can help you to make the right one," Robert said, trying to comfort the doctor, as the TARDIS landed with a thud. The doctor looked down in shame. "Not this time," I said with a look of hopelessness. "We've arrived." Agnes finally got up off her chair and looked towards the door. There was no light peering through the windows, only all-consuming darkness. "Where are we?" she inquired. The doctor looked at the readings on the scanner. "According to the TARDIS databank, we're nowhere." "But how's that possible? We've got to be somewhere, surely," Agnes inquired. "All I know is that out there is some kind of link to your people," the doctor said, joining Agnes at the door. "And how do you know that?" Agnes asked, looking to the doctor for answers. "Well, I kind of hooked you up to the TARDIS telepathic circuits, which allowed me to find memories of your people, wherever they are. They're outside those doors," they tried to explain. Agnes didn't really understand, but she moved to the door, unsure of what to expect, when she went outside. She exited the TARDIS, followed by the doctor and Robert. They found themselves in a deserted graveyard. Mist filled the air like a swarm of locusts. The inscriptions on the headstones were unlike anything Robert had seen in his life. However, Agnes knew them to be the names of her deceased loved ones. A familiar voice called out from amongst the mists. It was Cassidy. She ran to the doctor like a lost child after finding their family again. "Oh, thank God! I thought I'd never see anyone again," Cassidy said as she ran over to the doctor with a comforting embrace. Cassidy now awkwardly noticed Agnes and Robert. "What are these guys doing here?" she asked. "It's a long story. I'll explain later," the doctor replied, dismissing Cassidy and moving her aside next to Robert. Right. Now we've got Cassidy, we can go, right? Robert asked. No, that thing's still here. Trust me, it's deadly. It keeps talking about some kind of vessel. I don't think it will stop until it gets what it wants, Cassidy replied. Agnes looked down at the joint grave for her children. It was already derelict and covered in moss, despite the fact they'd only been dead a day. Which only means more deaths, Agnes said with a tear in her eye, as she thought about her children who had once played and larked about. Now they were nothing more than corpses. Doctor, Robert intervened. You wouldn't seriously sacrifice this woman, would you? It'd be genocide. The doctor turned to Robert. If I don't, the alternative is more deaths. Never-ending entropy. The pain of the deaths in Twarbyhurst, but on a universal scale. This is the price we have to pay. Agnes had overheard the conversation. So, that's the choice. My life or an entire universe of death. But Doctor, you can't, Cassidy protested. What else can I do? You can't stop something like that. It's already dead, the doctor explained. There's nowhere else it can go. With this doctor's statement, a huge uprooting of the graves occurred. Like a gigantic trowel had scooped up the entire graveyard and chucked them on the ground again. The graveyard was gone, and they were once again stood in endless nothingness. The puppet master stood before them, ready for their confrontation. The vessel. I have long awaited your arrival, the puppet master stated. Well, I'm sorry I'm late, Agnes quipped sarcastically. Cassidy reached out for Agnes. You don't have to do this. Just come with us into the TARDIS. We can go anywhere. You could run and be safe, she said through tears. I can't run from my fears anymore, Cassidy, she said as she looked towards the doctor. I have to face them. Look, if you want to remember me, do me a favour. When this is all done, take me home. I'll be dead, but it would mean a lot to me, she said, trying not to cry, as if she was trying to let Cassidy know that she was at peace with her decision. It would be my honour, the doctor said, as they too were feeling a bit teary too. Agnes let out a sorrowful smile. Thank you. No, thank you, the doctor replied as Agnes turned to face the puppet master. A final tear rolled down Agnes's cheek. So, you want to destroy the universe unless you get me? Maybe it will bring you peace. I hope it brings me peace too. I think I may just have something to say about you destroying the universe. And so will these guys. So I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to face my fears, she said, as she walked in the direction of the puppet master. The vessel, it stated, as it dived into the air and glided straight into Agnes's chest. She let out a painful cry as her final tear dropped from her chest and onto the floor. In her final moments, her mind transported her home. She could remember the beautiful planet she once lived in, the pungent smell of roses, the laughter of children playing, the soaring sunsets that she had watched from her window every morning, her family, her friends, everything she had once loved, before finally the life in her body was completely drained, and she became nothing but dust. Just like that, an entire species, its culture, its history, its future, was gone. Cassidy stood mournfully. She felt guilty, as if it had been all her fault. If she hadn't got caught, perhaps none of this would have happened, she thought. The doctor went over to the pile of dust that had been left behind. They collected what they could and sealed it in some kind of ancient-looking canopic jar. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, they said quietly, as one of them was talking to themselves. They felt they'd failed Cassidy as much as they'd failed to save Agnes. They had promised to do better, to save people no matter what the cost, and they'd failed. Later, our travellers now journeyed out of the void and to Agnes's home planet of Appalachia, a planet once ravished by plague, now just a planet. The planet seemed desolate, decaying and broken, Everywhere you looked, instead of soil, there was now dust. Plants and trees now completely petrified. There was a dark, hungry sky which looked as though it would swallow our travellers up. The doctor held out the urn, which they decorated with Appalachian inscriptions from their past. This was once one of the great wonders of the universe. Now it's nothing but dust. The universe is constantly moving, constantly changing. Everything has its time, and one day everything will end. This, however, this ending, they said before removing the lid of the urn, is just the beginning of something brand new and exciting, they explained as they graciously blew the dust off the urn. Then it cascaded out of the urn and fell into every nook and cranny of the planet. As it did so, it revitalised the soil, and soon purple sunlight would creep out from behind the dark clouds which dispersed. The entire planet completely changed in a heartbeat, the planet's landscape completely different. And who knows, perhaps one day this planet may once again be home to a new species. Let's hope they can live up to the reputation of the Appalachians before them, they stated, before finally ending the ceremony and going back to the TARDIS. It's so beautiful, Cassidy said, stunned by the bountiful beauty of the planet. The universe so often is, they said before ushering Cassidy and Robert back into the TARDIS and dematerialised. Back in the console room, the doctor had a proposition for Robert. Right, Robbie, they stated. Please don't call me that, he chuckled. Doc, he said with a wink. They gave him a menacing look in return. You see, I can try and take you home, although this ship of mine is somewhat unreliable, they said before starting to move some of the controls. Or I can take you anywhere and anywhen in the entire universe, they proposed. Robert joined the doctor at the console. How about... They paused, looking down at the console, and then up at the doctor again. Everywhere, he said with a smile. I hoped that'd be the case. Right, I'm sure Cassidy will show you to your room and help you get everything sorted. It's somewhere down there, I think, they said, pointing vaguely down a corridor. Robert ran down the corridor before waiting for Cassidy. That thing, whatever it was, it said I wasn't pure or whatever. I mean, you seem to know everything about it. What did it mean? Cassidy asked. I don't know, they replied, lying to her. But perhaps we'll find out. Cassidy smiled. I know that wasn't easy, but I do believe that you tried to find another option, and I think that's what counts, she said, trying to comfort them. Sadly, sometimes the only decisions we have are bad ones, but you still have to decide, they explained. Now, you better hurry on, or he'll get lost, you know. Cassidy reluctantly rushed after Robert, leaving the doctor alone at the console. They pulled a lever, and they were hurtled into their next adventure.